September 12, 2014. A 3-year-old boy in a Spider-Man suit is playing Tiger in his grandmother's yard. 5 minutes pass, he's gone.
No sound, no trace, just silence.
For 11 years, Australia has been searching for answers to what happened to William Tyrrell.
And this case is just. It's defined by these huge contradictions. Police now operate under the explicit belief that William never left that property alive.
Right.
They suspect his foster mother drove his body maybe 10 kilometers into bushland in her mother's gray Mazda.
A car that becomes absolutely critical.
A critical piece of evidence that was not forensically examined for 8 long days. And despite this, this very focused theory, nobody has ever been found. And as of today, no charges have been laid.
The cost of the search for William Tyrrell isn't just measured in the trauma for his 2 families. It is measured in systemic failures. A $1.48 million payout to an innocent man whose life was destroyed by tunnel vision.
Absolutely destroyed.
A lead detective, once a national hero, convicted and removed for illegally recording a person of interest. We have a documented confession from a dying man about driving William 300 kilometers north, a lead that was, by many accounts, never really investigated.
Not properly, no.
And most recently, a detailed brief of evidence recommending serious charges that prosecutors, well, they won't pursue it.
Right.
For you, the listener, we are going to lay out every fact, every flaw, and every competing theory in this case. What really happened to William Tyrrell?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
To really get your head around the William Tyrrell case, you have to first understand the shadow that was cast over it from the very beginning, and that's the Australian child protection system.
Absolutely.
William's legal status was not that of a typical missing child. Not at all. It complicates everything. William Tyrrell was born on June 26, 2011. But his life with his biological parents, Carly Tyrrell and Brendan Collins, it was tragically short-lived. He was placed in out-of-home care, or OHC, at just 9 months old. This was early 2012.
9 months. So what led to that?
The intervention was deemed necessary because of just a severe and sustained history of chaos surrounding his parents. We're talking documented instances of violence, theft, chronic substance abuse. It wasn't a stable environment for an infant.
And the family, his biological family, they didn't just accept this. There was resistance, wasn't there?
Oh, meter resistance. They did not hand him over willingly. When the authorities actually tried to execute the court order for his removal, William was hidden.
Hidden where?
At his paternal grandfather's house in Western Sydney for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And this period, it really illustrates the extreme measures the family took to resist the state intervening. It just underscores how high conflict his custody case was, even years before he vanished.
So when he was finally removed, he ends up with a foster family on Sydney's affluent North Shore. A very different world.
A completely different environment. We know from court documents that this family was professional, stable, and crucially, they were committed to him. They were actively considering formal adoption.
So he was truly part of their family, not just a temporary placement.
Exactly. He was deeply integrated.
Yeah.
But here's where the systemic problem starts, and it directly impacts the investigation.
Okay.
For the first 3 years after William vanished, the public, the media, even a lot of people involved in the search, they had no idea he was a ward of the state.
And that wasn't an accident. That secrecy was mandated by law, right?
It was required.
Yeah.
Under Section 135 of the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act. Now, this law is designed, and for good reason, to protect the privacy and identity of vulnerable kids in foster care.
Of course.
But when a 3-year-old child vanishes from a small town in a bright red Spider-Man suit, that secrecy becomes a massive investigative problem.
How did that legal constraint actually impact the search on the ground and just the public's perception of the case?
The impact was, frankly, devastating to transparency. Because the foster parents were legally required to keep up this facade to let everyone believe they were the biological parents, their behavior was immediately scrutinized and misunderstood.
Right, so any hesitation they showed.
Any reluctance to give personal details or appear constantly in the media was seen by the public as suspicious, not as a legal requirement. It just fueled all these early conspiracy theories. It created confusion that made it harder for the public to offer credible information because they didn't fully grasp the family's context or their vulnerability within the whole OHC system.
So they're in an impossible position. The family present at the disappearance can't be fully open with anyone without breaking the law.
Exactly. And it wasn't until 2017, 3 full years after he went missing, that a NSW Supreme Court judge finally ruled that his foster status had to be disclosed.
And what was the reasoning for that change?
The judge argued that keeping it secret was no longer serving William's welfare, given the overwhelming probability that he was sadly deceased. The court prioritized the public interest, the accountability of the OAC system, over the privacy of a boy who was almost certainly no longer alive.
And that ruling, it just fundamentally changed everything.
It shifted the investigation's focus entirely and allowed for the kind of intense scrutiny of the foster family dynamic that came to define Phase 2.
It's just a powerful irony at the heart of it all. A law meant to protect a child ended up protecting the very secrecy that might have complicated the search from day one.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to that day. September 12, 2014, the last time anyone saw William.
The location is the foster grandmother's home on Benaroon Drive in Kendall. It's a small, pretty isolated village on the mid-north coast of New South Wales.
And isolation is the key word here. This isn't your average suburban street.
Not at all. The home is on a small estate, kind of exposed. The yards are large, but the property is bordered directly by incredibly dense, rugged bushland. You've got creeks, thick scrub, steep slopes. For a 3-year-old, that terrain is immediately unforgiving. It's the kind of place where you can step off the lawn and just be gone.
And the image that we all know, the Spider-Man suit, that's from these final moments.
Yes. Between about 10:0 and 10:25 in the morning, William, age 3, and his 5-year-old sister are playing hide and seek. William is running between the front and back yards.
Okay.
The foster mother was apparently nearby on the veranda. The foster grandmother was inside. The last specific detail we have is William imitating a tiger's roar as he ran toward the side of the house in that bright suit.
And then silence.
The foster mother claims she went inside briefly, maybe for as little as 5 minutes, to make a cup of tea. When the silence registered, she said she immediately started searching the house, the veranda, the perimeter. A frantic search began.
But the timeline of that immediate search, the gap between the silence and the call to emergency services,
Sure.
that becomes maybe the most contentious detail of the whole case.
It really is. The 000 call was placed at 10:57 a.m.
Which means there is a 32-minute gap.
A 32-minute gap. Think about that. Over half an hour goes by from the moment they realize the 3-year-old in their care is gone to the moment they call the police.
Right.
Investigators later seized on this time window. They claimed it was manipulated. If you genuinely think a toddler has wandered into dense bush, every single second counts. Delaying that long, it raises immediate, serious questions.
Then the police theory that comes out years later, it hinges entirely on what happened in those 32 minutes, doesn't it?
Precisely. The early suspicion was, okay, maybe the family panicked, maybe they underestimated how long they were away, maybe they said 5 minutes when it was closer to 20. But the later, more damaging theory of Phase 2 is that 32-minute gap was used to cover up an incident that had already happened right there on the property.
And the property itself, you said it was on a slope. Could he have just wandered out of sight that fast?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The layout of the property, the topology, it definitely enabled a rapid disappearance, either accidental or, intentional. The house layout meant that running around the side would put a child completely out of sight in seconds.
Okay.
But the crucial thing that complicated the whole wandered off theory was what the sniffer dogs found, or rather what they didn't find.
So the initial response is huge.
Massive. It's driven by this belief that William was taken if he wasn't lost in the bush. You've got hundreds of personnel, SES, RFS, volunteers searching day and night, helicopters, motorcycle squads. They combed everything. Every house in the estate was searched multiple times.
And all hands on deck effort. But what was the one piece of evidence that immediately cast doubt on the simplest theory, that he just walked away?
The scent trail anomaly. The detection dogs they used early on. I mean, these are highly specialized animals. They can track the path a child takes. Yet these dogs only found William's scent within the boundaries of the backyard.
Just in the yard.
Only in the yard. There was absolutely no scent trail leading away from the property into that dense bushland surrounding it.
That one finding is it's a major pillar of this entire investigation. It suggests he was either lifted off the property or he got into a car. He didn't wander off on his own 2 feet.
It completely undermined the wandered off theory right from the very start. And it forced the police command to immediately set up Strike Force Roseanne, a dedicated homicide squad task force.
And their primary theory was?
Opportunistic abduction, based on the speed and the silence of it all. This task force, it ballooned over the years. It generated something like 11,000 documents. and identified 690 persons of interest.
So in those early days, the focus was on suspicious cars. What kind of leads did police have?
There were sightings of several vehicles near Benaroon Drive that morning. Locals reported seeing a white station wagon and an older-style gray sedan parked nearby, which was weird. Windows down.
Huh?
And a dark 4WD was also seen speeding away around 10:30 a.m., which is, right in that time frame. In a tiny, quiet place like Kendall, unfamiliar cars just stand out immediately.
And then there's the witness sighting that seemed to just confirm the abduction theory right away. The testimony of Ronald Chapman.
Chapman was a neighbor. He claimed to have seen a fawn-colored 4WD driving recklessly down the road. He said a blonde-haired woman was driving, and chillingly, a small boy was standing unrestrained in the back seat, wearing a Spider-Man suit.
I mean, if that's true, it places William alive, abducted, and moving right after he vanished.
Exactly. But this seemingly critical piece of testimony, it suffered from a huge institutional failure.
How so?
Despite being such strong witness testimony, the police failed to formally investigate Chapman's sighting for 6 months.
6 months.
6 months. That delay is just catastrophic. Any chance to forensically link that car, find other witnesses, track its path, it all just vanished. Later, investigators suggested Chapman might have gotten the timing wrong, but the initial failure to chase the strongest abduction lead, they had severely hampered that whole first phase.
And the early police focus was also intensely on local sex offenders. The former lead detective even described the area as being infested with predators.
Yes, the statistics were alarming. Around 20 registered sex offenders lived in the general Kendall area. Police intensely explored links to a group called Grandparents as Parents, again, or Jamathia, suspecting some kind of coordinated network might be involved.
And did they find anything?
That focus drove the investigation for years. But despite all the surveillance and work, they never established a direct forensic or communication link between this Japanese network, any registered offender, and William's disappearance. The abduction theory was compelling, but the evidence to prove who did it just wasn't there.
Before we move on to the massive institutional failures that derailed this first phase, let's pause for a moment.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.
Okay, so the first phase of this investigation, it really just imploded because of institutional errors. And the scale of it is almost unprecedented in Australian policing. And the epicenter of that failure was the targeting of a local repairman, Bill Spedding.
Spedding, yeah. He was a local washing machine repairman who had called the foster grandmother's home days before the disappearance to arrange a service call. And he became the absolute fixation of the lead detective, Gary Jubilant, and Strike Force Roseanne. It just consumed years of their investigation and resources.
But despite that intense focus, Spedding had a verifiable, rock-solid alibi for the exact time William vanished.
He did. An ironclad alibi. He was at a school assembly for his grandchildren, and he had credit card receipts from a coffee shop to prove where he was. Yet Jubilant's team pursued him relentlessly. They showed classic signs of what the court later called tunnel vision.
And the tactics they used against him went way beyond just surveillance. They were destructive, calculated, and ultimately illegal.
They were egregious. Police publicly targeted Spedding. They raided his home and his business, and then, in what seems like a desperate move to pressure him into a confession for the Tyrrell case, they resurrected historical, unsubstantiated child sex charges against him from decades earlier.
Charges that had already been discredited.
Yes, they've been dismissed or discredited in family court proceedings where a judge found the children might have been coached into making allegations during a really vicious custody battle. The police just used them as a weapon.
The goal wasn't justice for those old claims, it was leverage.
Absolutely. It was coercive police work, and in the end, it failed. Spedding maintained his innocence on everything, and eventually, all the charges were dropped or dismissed. But the system, it had already ruined him.
And the true measure of that failure, it came in 2022.
That's when the NSW Supreme Court awarded Bill Spedding $1.48 million in damages for malicious prosecution.
Wow.
Yeah. The court found the police had acted without any credible evidence linking him to William, and that their pursuit of him was aggressive and malicious. Spedding lost his business, his reputation, he was physically assaulted, he lost custody of his grandchildren, had to move house. That huge payout confirmed just how disastrous Phase 1 was, and it dealt a fatal blow to the credibility of the whole abduction investigation.
And if that wasn't enough, the architect of that strategy, Detective Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin, was also removed from the case and eventually convicted.
Jubelin was convicted in April 2020 for illegally recording 4 conversations with Paul Savage, who was a neighbor and a person of interest. He did it without a warrant. It was a breach of privacy law.
And his defense was what?
His defense was that he felt extreme pressure and was justified in using any means necessary to solve the case. But crossing that legal line, it resulted in his conviction and his forced departure from the police force. And it just irrevocably tainted any evidence that was gathered under his direction.
Which raises this powerful question that still echoes today. Was Jubelin removed just for his illegal actions, or was there an internal motivation? Was he exposing incompetence, or maybe getting too close to a truth that the NSW police brass just wanted to bury?
You can't ignore the rumors, especially when you consider what Jubelin revealed in his own internal reports. He highlighted systemic chaos within the unsolved homicide unit. He detailed how evidence from 22 other unsolved homicide cases was found just neglected and scattered in a basement.
Oh, wow.
So whether he was pushed or he jumped, his removal marked the definitive end of the abduction hypothesis as the leading official theory. The investigation had to shift, and shift drastically, to have any hope of resolution.
Okay, so the investigation completely U-turns around 2020. New leadership comes in, and they abandon the search for a stranger and focus exclusively on the Foster family.
Right. And the new theory is simple, and it's chilling. William died on the property.
Oh.
This Phase 2 theory, it posits that William died accidentally in the moments right after he disappeared. Specifically, they suggest an accidental fall from the first-floor balcony of the home, and that after this tragedy, the remaining seconds of that 32-minute window were used for a desperate cover-up.
But why risk everything to cover up an accident? What was the alleged motive the police presented?
The police theorized the motive was panic. Panic driven by fear of the child protection system.
Okay.
The foster mother was considering formal adoption. She was already fostering William's sister, also a ward of the state. Police alleged she feared that if authorities found William had died accidentally on her property, they'd judge her supervision as negligent.
And she would lose the other child.
She'd lose William's sister immediately and be permanently barred from fostering. The cover-up was allegedly an attempt to keep the family unit she'd built.
And the method of disposal, that became central to their theory, the gray Mazda 3.
Correct. Police alleged the body was swiftly wrapped and disposed of using the foster grandmother's gray Mazda 3, driven to nearby bushland off a place called Batar Creek Road. And this single detail brings us to what many experts consider the most catastrophic forensic failure of the entire case.
The car wasn't examined until September 20th, 8 days after William vanished.
8 days. It's an inexcusable delay.
Yeah.
In a high-stakes missing child case, a vehicle at the scene should be immediately seized and processed for trace evidence. By waiting 8 days, any biological material, blood, fluids, fibers from the suit, DNA could have been degraded or, more likely in the police's view, thoroughly cleaned away.
So that delay basically destroyed the only alleged physical link between the house and the disposal site.
It severely compromised it, yes. So without a confession, and with the car evidence likely gone, police had to rely heavily on behavioral factors and circumstantial evidence.
And this intense scrutiny, it led to the discovery of what police called collateral crimes.
Right. Covert recordings made during the investigation revealed evidence of intimidation and assault against another child in the foster family's care, not William.
These were serious charges, and they led to convictions.
They did. In March 2024, the foster mother was found guilty of 2 counts of intimidation and 2 counts of common assault, including using a wooden spoon and kicking the child during a timeout. The foster father was found guilty of 1 count of intimidation.
And the court was clear these were unrelated to William.
The court was explicitly clear they were unrelated, but the fact remains. The discovery of this behavior gave police what they saw as the circumstantial motive for a cover-up, a clear, established fear of interaction with child protection services.
And with that, police really ramped up the pressure to get a confession or location.
Oh, yeah. In late 2021, detectives subjected the foster mother to a secretive hearing at the NSW Crime Commission. It's a very confrontational environment. They used aggressive psychological tactics, stating directly to her, "We know how it happened, we know why it happened, and we know where he is."
And her response?
Despite that extreme pressure, she consistently and tearfully denied any involvement. She maintained William was abducted. And she was later acquitted of lying to the commission, which again just shows how hard it is to establish criminal intent without any physical evidence.
So this new theory triggers a massive new search in November 2021.
A huge search. And this one is focused on that 10-kilometer area around Bennerin Drive and Batar Creek Road, the alleged disposal route. And this is not a casual search. This was state-of-the-art forensic technology.
So what kind of methods are we talking about here, years after the fact?
The intensity was unprecedented. Police used luminol spraying in and around the house, especially on the balcony and garden beds, hoping to detect even trace amounts of blood. They used ground-penetrating radar GPR across entire sections of the bush to look for soil disturbances. And crucially, they did 100% GPS mapping, meaning every square meter of those high-probability zones was physically covered and documented.
And the digging efforts were huge, right?
They excavated enormous volumes of soil with heavy machinery. And that soil was then meticulously sifted by hand, bucket by bucket, searching for any trace. They even pumped water out of streams and dams. They were looking for anything.
And despite all that effort, all that technology, and the fact that a polyester Spider-Man suit should last for hundreds of years, they found nothing.
Nothing. No remains, not a single thread of the costume. The results were just devastatingly unproductive.
So why did the science fail?
This is where we run into the forensic roadblocks that are unique to this environment. The search only yielded animal bones and unrelated bits of fabric. Forensic experts testified at the inquest about the rapid, aggressive deterioration of juvenile remains in the Australian bush.
Can you explain the specific conditions that would do that?
Okay, so first, the soil itself. The terrain around Kendall is known for its highly acidic soil. Acidity just rapidly leaches minerals from bone. Second, a child's bones have inherently lower mineral density than an adult's, which makes them far more susceptible to breaking down in those conditions.
Right.
And when you combine that with high moisture, temperature swings. The environment effectively acts as a natural crematorium.
And then on top of the chemistry, you've got the local scavengers.
Absolutely. The Kendall area has wild dogs, foxes, and monitor lizards goannas, which are incredibly efficient scavengers. Experts noted they could scatter or consume smaller remains over a large area within days, if not hours. So while the total absence of remains seems impossible to an average person, the forensic testimony suggests that in those conditions, the lack of discovery, even with the most intense search, is sadly plausible.
Plausible, but not provable.
And for a prosecutor, plausible is not beyond reasonable doubt.
So even with the police completely committed to this domestic incident theory, these alternate possibilities, they've never really gone away, have they?
Not at all. The opportunistic abductor theory still casts a very long shadow, and it's often fueled by leaks from investigative journalists.
And the figure at the center of that shadow is Frank Abbott.
Frank Abbott, yes. A convicted sex offender who lived locally. He's 84 now, in jail for other crimes, but he has consistently been named as a key person of interest, especially by the detectives who worked on Phase 1.
And there were claims as recently as this year suggesting he confessed to his brother.
Right. That he boasted about killing William and burying him in a suitcase near a site called Big Bird Mountain, or the Bird Tree, which is about 10 kilometers away from the house.
I mean, that's highly specific information.
It is. And former homicide detectives have been very critical that this specific site has never had the same exhaustive forensic search. The luminol, the GPR, the sifting that was applied to the foster mother's alleged disposal route.
And Abbott himself wanted to give evidence.
He reportedly requested to give evidence at the inquest via video link, but that request was never acted upon by the court. So that potential avenue is it's left unresolved.
The implication being that the current investigation's tunnel vision might be just as damaging as the tunnel vision that ruined the Spedding inquiry.
It creates that perception of bias, absolutely. If you're committed to one theory, any external lead becomes secondary, no matter how specific it is.
And then there's the very confusing confession of Ray Porter.
Yeah, Ray Porter was a man who, while he was dying in 2019, confessed to his caretaker that he had driven a friend and a small boy, matching William's description 300 kilometers north of Kendall, shortly after the disappearance.
But the complication is he had an alibi for the morning William vanished.
He did. A rock-solid alibi. He was receiving dialysis in a hospital that morning, so he couldn't have been there at 10 to 5 a.m. However, subsequent traffic camera analysis showed that Porter was caught on camera in the Kendall area in the days following the disappearance.
So what does that mean?
Well, it muddies the waters. It suggests that while he couldn't have been the one to take William initially, maybe he was involved in transporting him later, days after the event. Authorities reportedly discounted it because of the initial alibi, but the camera evidence. It's a troubling inconsistency for the local burial theory.
And finally, we have to go back to Paul Savage, the neighbor who was illegally recorded. While he was cleared, his experience just highlights the chaotic nature of that early investigation.
Savage was the victim of what you can only call investigative desperation. Jubilan's team planted a replica Spider-Man suit near Savage's walking path to try and provoke a reaction.
And he was recorded saying some strange things.
He was observed saying these panicked phrases like, "Don't tell anyone, love, they're right after me." While police concluded he was talking about something completely unrelated, the fact that a lead detective was illegally targeting neighbors and using such manipulative tactics, it just shows the profound lack of methodical analysis that characterized Phase 1.
So we arrive at the current status, late 2025. After the pivot and the big search in 2021, the police feel they have enough circumstantial evidence. In June 2023, they recommend the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, charge the foster mother.
Yeah, with perverting the course of justice and interfering with a corpse.
And that recommendation, it signals the police are 100% convinced of their theory.
They believe the accidental death, the cover-up, the disposal, it was all provable. But the DPP decision, which came out in late 2025, is the critical final roadblock. The DPP declined to prosecute.
And this is the core of the problem, isn't it? The police believe they know what happened, but the prosecutors disagree. Why would they refuse when the police spent years building this case?
It comes down to the huge gap between investigative suspicion and the legal burden of proof. The DPP has to be satisfied that a jury would convict beyond reasonable doubt. The entire police case rests on circumstantial evidence, covert recordings about unrelated assaults, a timeline inconsistency, and that's it. Without William's body, without a confession, without forensic material from that car. The DPP concluded the evidence just wasn't enough to meet that high criminal standard. They can't take a case to trial that they expect to fail.
So if the criminal system can't provide a resolution, the focus now falls entirely on the coronial inquest.
Exactly. The coronial inquest operates on a lower burden of proof. Its goal isn't conviction, it's to determine the identity of the deceased, the manner, and the cause of death. And the evidentiary phase of this marathon inquest finally closed in late 2024.
So what happens next in the coroner's court?
Well, the legal arguments are being finalized right now. Counsel assisting the coroner, the police commissioner's lawyers, the foster parents' legal teams, they're all due to file their final exhaustive submissions between February and June 2025.
And then we wait for a finding.
Based on that timeline, the coroner's final findings are expected sometime in early to mid-2026. And that finding will be the first definitive legal ruling on what happened to William Tyrrell.
The trauma of this, it's just impacted the entire region. Locals say the disappearance has left a terrible stigma on the community of Kendall.
And despite the lack of charges and all the competing theories, the official commitment to finding William is still there. The $1 million reward is still on offer.
And that's significant.
It is, because it's offered specifically for the recovery of William, regardless of whether a conviction is ever secured. Finding his remains is the primary goal for the community, no matter the legal outcome.
This 11-year legacy, the dizzying swing between stranger abduction and domestic cover-up, the institutional failures, it just highlights a profound and devastating crisis, leaving Australia with a wound that just won't heal until the boy in the Spider-Man suit is finally found.
The only certainty we have is that William Tyrrell is still missing, presumed deceased. The lack of resolution, despite 11,000 documents, a $1 million reward, and two completely different police theories. It speaks to a failure that goes far beyond what happened on September 12, 2014.
The final horizon of justice now rests with the coroner, Deputy State Coroner Harriet Graham. The question for the next year is whether she can provide the definitive legal opinion that the police and prosecutors could not. But even if she names someone, as the experts confirmed, the answer to the ultimate question, where are his remains, may still be lost to the acidic soil and the hungry bush.
We honor the memory of the boy in the Spider-Man suit, and we have to acknowledge the ongoing trauma and uncertainties suffered by both his biological and foster families. The search for closure continues.
The one piece of forensic data that has never changed in this decade is that initial finding. The detection dogs only found William's scent inside the backyard. If you connect that single verified fact to the police's subsequent focus on a domestic cover-up, it raises a simple, chilling thought. What if the key to solving this case isn't about finding a body in the bush 10 kilometers away, but about uncovering the absolute, precise truth of what happened during the brief, chaotic 32 minutes immediately following the silence?
If you have any information, no matter how small, about the disappearance of William Tyrrell, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. You can remain anonymous.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.